Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 9 of Project Ares. Previously on Project Ares, we developed a new heavy lifter called the Cerberus. We'd used it to put up a geosynchronous satellite, and then our first space station module. Now, to get the Kerbals up to Ares Station, we're going to need a crew launcher, and so we started testing the new Ares crew vehicle. We saw what was going on back at Kerbin as well. The scientists there have discovered that it was a comet of unusual composition that has blocked the wormhole in communications, and that it may be on a collision course with Earth. So far, Earth has no idea, so this could go badly, and we're going to need to keep an eye on that story to see how it develops. The Ares crew vehicle is ready for its maiden flight, so I'm waiting for the space station to come over our launch site here. We've already had a few unmanned tests, the first of which you were able to see previously. And things seem ready for the real deal now. And as we launch, let me keep you up to date on changes to my install. I have not produced a video for about 3 weeks now, so it's a good thing that I'd gotten myself ahead of schedule. You've been watching episodes that I made a long time ago from my point of view, and then I wasn't able to make anything. I'm almost caught up again to what I've made due to many factors. This Ares launch vehicle, for example, took about a week to develop all by itself. A super heavy lifter that you're going to see later in this episode also took about a week to develop. Almost a week was spent on space station designs, craft designs, putting in new parts, visual improvements, done a lot of work there. I also spent several days on bug fixing, especially an issue with infernal robotics that I'm having and that you're going to see later. Lots of mods have been added. I can't even begin to guess which ones or how many since my last major status update. It's a lot though. As a result, I have been trimming parts to keep my loading times lower, but it takes about 8 minutes to load the game right now still, so I have a bit more trimming that I need to do. People have been asking for more and more teal sites to be added to my remote tech settings. I've directed everyone to my Kerbal forums to follow instructions there on how to get sites added for yourself. If you want a site added, go to the forums and make a post with the necessary details. You can see why it took so long to make some of the stuff that I've got. If you look at that as that booster drops away, how gorgeous is this? Look at that ground down there. Amazing, first of all, that ground. That took days to set up. The thrust curve on the booster, that took a while. The separation procedure took a while. Everything still has some issues though. The ullage on the interstage lasts too long, so the interstage doesn't drop as early as I'd like. Also, the craft gets near its initial orbit and starts wiggling. That's a thing that happens a lot in stock, but is usually a little better using the MechJeb attitude control. In this case, it's not. As you know, in stock, there are little attitude controls on the side of the nav ball. Those have two problems for me a lot. One, they overcorrect all the time. If you're pointing 180 degrees from where you want to go and you activate that to flip around and go the other direction, you'll flip about 250 degrees instead of 180, going way past where you want to stop. Then it'll slow down and swing back, but still shoot past what you want. By little, eventually things will slow down to the point that it's going in the right direction, but it takes a while. And MechJeb has a set of the exact same controls that I sometimes use. The stock stability handler is not as effective as the MechJeb one that does the same thing. In this case, even MechJeb was not holding me steady enough, and when the engines cut off, we go tumbling. And I said there were two things. The second one was that when you get toward the end of your launch, a lot of times things will wiggle. So yeah, one is they autocorrect too much, and two is the stability hold wiggles a lot. In this case, all I did was wait for a full 360-degree flip, and then I decoupled. I was able to activate my upper RCS with an action group, and then with so much less mass to maneuver, it was easy to get things settled down. Now, I'm shooting for a 400 to 500 kilometer orbit. That's why we've stopped at about that 4 to 500 range on our apoapsis. The Ares station is at 500 kilometers. We're going to bring up our periapsis on our Ares here up to just out of the atmosphere, and then wait for this phasing orbit to catch up to the Ares station. The crew on board for the maiden flight here are Jebediah as the command pilot, Bill for engineering, and Hadfield for science. The plan is to dock with the Ares station and fix up any minor problems it might have before we start true space station assembly. The second station launch is scheduled for just 3 days from now. It's time to set up our orbit for true rendezvous, so I get ready to activate the hypergolic engines once again. This will be our last time, short of the deorbit burn. After that, we shut down and look at the close approach distance. Usually you can adjust that with just RCS when this far away from the target, so I give that a try. Typically, it's a little trial and error for me. I press left and see if I get closer or further. If I get further, I press right. If I get neither closer nor further, then I try a different direction. Try up, if that works, do it some more until it stops working, down, forward and backward, all directions until no changes seem to be doing anything useful anymore. After that, if I need to get even closer still, I just set up a new rendezvous intercept maneuver somewhere else further up ahead in time. It would be great if I could do what I do in normal KSP and just launch straight from the ground to my station without a phasing orbit in between, but the inclination, the need for sunlight, my self-imposed range safety concerns, they all make that almost impossible. In general, all my rendezvous are going to take a lot longer than normal KSP does, so I'll show this one, but in the future you may see me skipping a lot of the fiddly parts of this process. In the future, I will probably go from the cool launch part at the beginning to the cool docking part at the end without quite so much in the middle. But as you can see, we have finally made it to the station. Our 3 crew are very happy about that. It's taken over a day to get here, but we're making that final approach now. Little teeny adjustments to the RCS at this point are changing me by 100 or 200 meters at a time. As I get closer to the station, that will go down though. Those adjustments will be much smaller. We'll just zoom ahead a little bit further. You can see the time to closest approach indicator shows that we're now getting really close. Once it gets so close like that, actually it begins going back up again. At first it'll say you're a minute to closest approach, but then as you get even closer and slowing down to the same speed as your target, it'll begin going 10 minutes to closest approach, 20 minutes to closest approach, and that just means that you're succeeding, you're almost there. And so now here we are, we're finally making that approach. Unfortunately, it's on the dark side, but it still seems like you can see the station and the crew fairly well. We ease in for that final docking, and just as we touch, nothing happens. Nothing at all. What? Oh, look at that. There's some sort of bumper that's on the animation for the station, and it has popped out, and I can't get it back in. I fiddled with it a little bit, couldn't get it back in. So I decided, all right, let's go down along the side of the station, and we'll come in. There's 2 other docking nodes there. We'll come in from the side and try to hook up with one of those. So we ease our way along down the side, back in again, approaching, closer, closer. You know where the story's going to go, don't you? Yep, we're going to get up there and we're going to bump against it, and it still isn't going to dock. It turns out those little things that are sticking out on the front of this docking node are just at this distance incompatible with the big docking node that I have there. I really should have tested this more down on the ground. So we're going to have to get out, probably do an EVA, maybe even send up a different flight, who knows, try to figure out how to fix that, and then we'll make another docking attempt, possibly with a different flight. But for now, we're going to have to leave this one right where it is. Next up, we have a camera set up to watch our static engine ground test. We're not launching this one yet. We're looking at the flow of the propellants and the engine burn here of our new super heavy lifter. This one is so big that initially it was destroying the launch pad just trying to bring it out. So we have added some structural integrity to the launch pad, beefed that up quite a bit, and now we can support the weight of that launcher. It is capable of lifting over 200 tons. It didn't start out that way. At the very beginning, a miscalculation on the engine thrust and booster curves made it so that it didn't even have enough thrust to get itself off the launch pad. A few tweaks later, and it is able to lift its 200 tons that it was promised, maybe even 250. We haven't checked to see what the absolute limit is on that yet. I'll need to do some of that math. And of course, we're talking about at least low Earth orbit for that. This is probably capable of doing a whole lot more. If we lower that mass down, we can send stuff who knows where out in the universe. This one is just going to 500 kilometers, a low Earth orbit launch. We're going to rendezvous with the Ares station, delivering the first solar truss to the station. This is not going to be an ISS replica. It is somewhat of a replica of a different thing, something that never existed. So after checking all of the external cameras and making sure we're ready to go, we are off. This is the Perun launcher, known as the Thor in English. It's my new super heavy lift vehicle using the most advanced technology that humans can muster from what we've taught them so far. It's probably the last in the non-reusables that I will be building, though it may go through a few refinements or different revisions before we're done with it. It weighs in at almost 18,000 tons today. I have a pop-up window to track the stats for the fuel on the radial fuel tanks, the main engines, and the boosters so that we can watch the vehicle perform during its liftoff. I need to drop the radial tanks when they run out of fuel and the boosters when they drop their thrust down to 1%. Each of the 5 lower stage Hydrolox engines is generating almost 40,000 kilonewtons of thrust, and each of the 2 solid boosters is providing almost 95,000 kilonewtons at sea level. After the first 2 seconds, that is, because the thrust curve goes from 80% to 100% over the first 2 seconds. That way it kind of stabilizes, doesn't just jolt off the launch pad. So that means that the liftoff thrust is almost 400 meganewtons. That thrust will last for 12 seconds before it starts ramping down for max Q. We don't want to go through that too fast. You can see the thrust curve and where we are on it with the little inset window that I've added. The launcher was designed by 5 different divisions of the space agency, and you can see the results of that in the disharmony of its construction. One group of scientists is designing the space station, and so they designed the payload. Another group is doing the upper stage, a third group is doing the second stage, and a fourth group designed the lower stage, while a fifth one is doing all of the engines for all of it. So what happened was the division in charge of the second stage thought the whole launcher was going to be a certain diameter, and therefore they built their stage at that diameter. But it turned out that they were wrong, and their stage was too wide. They solved the problem by creating tapered interstages to link it between the first and third stages. Now, the builders of the lower stage didn't realize what the Kerbals meant by heavy, super heavy lift launcher. They were going for a lower maximum payload mass. Once they learned the truth, they realized the lower stage probably did want to be the diameter of the second stage. And the second stage team got plenty of "we told you so's" after that debacle. Anyway, the first stage team, they fixed the problem by adding those radial drop tanks for the extra fuel, and by extending the size of the liquid oxygen tank on the inside. That led to the next problem. The engines were not strong enough for the design they had originally planned, so solid boosters were created to give it that sea level extra kick that it needed. They are working on even better engines for the future to make sure they can truly lift the 250 tons that they say this launcher is supposed to manage. As the first stage drained, even with the boosters gone, the thrust started getting quite high, and the main engines had a thrust curve of their own, just like the solid boosters, but it still would get high because even with the thrust curve bringing all those engines down to 50%, with 5 of those engines all going and with so little mass left, the thrust to weight ratio was way too high, and so I set up an action group that would disable the middle engine, which is exactly what the Saturn V does. A fuel pipe runs up the middle in the tank, and that pipe is longer than all the other fuel pipes, which means as the fuel drains, the pipe, the end of it, goes up above the level of the fuel, and so it gets fuel deprived, and that shuts down the engine. By shutting down one engine and running only on 4, we of course lose 20% thrust, and that brings our overall thrust to weight down into a more reasonable range. Not long after that, the entire stage is drained and burns out, and at that point we are going over 4,000 meters per second. We're halfway there. Stage 2 runs on just 4 engines that are more optimized for vacuum thrust. They combine to generate over 16,000 kilonewtons of thrust for about 3 minutes. After that, we drop the stage and we're on to Stage 3 with its single engine that has an extendable nozzle for improved vacuum performance and generates over 5,000 kilonewtons of thrust. This one uses a new engine design called an expander cycle. You may remember I explained engine cycles in episode 5, and if you want to see that again, then click here, because I'm going to explain the expander cycle now, and I'm going to be picking up where I left off last time. If you remember from when we did staged combustion, the fuel came through here, went past that impeller, down past the valve, through the nozzle, heating up the fuel and cooling down the nozzle, sending it up to the pre-burner where it met a little bit of siphoned off oxidizer that came from over here. The rest of it went down into the main combustion chamber. What got burned here would then go up past the turbine and down with none of it going overboard into here, burning, and then all the exhaust coming out. Now in an expander cycle engine, we're going to completely change around the design of this. We're going to take out the pre-burner here entirely, just get rid of that. We don't need this valve anymore because the pre-burner's gone. Now the oxidizer just goes straight past that valve and down into the engine. The heated fuel is now what's going to go up here past the turbine and then back toward the engine. This works with a light fuel such as liquid hydrogen, which is what we're using because it has such a low boiling point that it just vaporizes really fast, expands quite a bit, and is able to provide enough pressure to push that turbine that turns the impellers and then provides everything down into here for burning and exhaust. Once we activate the third stage at the apoapsis, that's when we're going to dump off the extra mass of the fairing. It was being used to help stabilize the payload a little, but we're not going to be pushing too hard right here. We get our periapsis just out of the atmosphere, and now we have a phasing orbit we can use in order to try to rendezvous with the space station.
Joseph said you're ready for me to come and try going through.
That's right, hop in and we'll get started immediately. Nothing seems to work. It's just, I don't know. Tell Joseph I'll keep working on it.
Okay, I'll come back later.
And that is going to do it for now. The truss segment has almost set up the rendezvous. We're going to finish that now, and next time you're going to see us dock that and check out how it works. So until next time, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.